I love you. Don't let them do this. Don't let them.
Soap operas in the 80s and 90s were absolutely insane, and I gave some examples of all of that craziness in a recent video. From cloning to underground cities and even demonic possession, the soap world went all out. But as many of you pointed out in the comments, there was so much more madness that I didn't cover, which means follow-up video time! Hi, I'm Natalie, and welcome to my channel, my so-called Gen X life. Today, in honor of our beloved moms, aunts, grandmas, and babysitters in the 80s who couldn't get enough of these stories, we're diving into even more insane soap opera storylines from the golden age of soaps. We'll also take a look back at some soap backstory from that era, and I'll tell you where you can stream some of those legendary shows if you're up for a rewatch. And spoiler alert, I've linked a few of these storylines for you to watch for free on YouTube in the description below. Daytime soaps started way back in the 1930s on radio, eventually making their way to TV in the 50s. For decades, these shows followed the lives of the same set of characters living in the same town, facing daily dramas at home or work. Their core audience, stay-at-home moms tuning in faithfully, and they were sponsored by household giants like Procter & Gamble, hence the name soap operas. But in 1981, the soap world turned upside down. That year, General Hospital introduced us to the super couple Luke and Laura, who saved the world from a villain who was trying to freeze it. Add to that the rise of VCRs and Betamax recorders, and suddenly everyone, from stay-at-home moms to busy working adults outside of the home, they were all hooked on soaps. 1981 was a whirlwind year for daytime dramas. Audiences couldn't get enough of the younger, more glamorous characters embroiled in non-stop drama that combined romance, action, and even a dash of sci-fi. This was a far cry from the soaps of yesteryear. When Luke and Laura finally tied the knot in November of 1981, it became the most watched daytime soap event in U.S. history. Media outlets went crazy. Merchandise flew off the shelves, celebrities declared their love for their favorite couples, and even college campuses saw groups of students gathering to watch the daily installments together. And it wasn't just General Hospital fueling this soap mania. Shows like Days of Our Lives, One Life to Live, All My Children, Ryan's Hope, Another World, Young and the Restless, and Guiding Light quickly followed suit. By the mid-80s, soaps had reached an unprecedented peak in popularity, profitability, and cultural relevance. In 1984 alone, the network's annual daytime revenues hit their highest point ever, $1.25 billion in ad sales, which is around $3.78 billion today when adjusted for inflation. ABC Daytime was a massive moneymaker, accounting for 50% of the entire network's profits. There were soap opera award shows, magazines, and a whole entire industry of soap actors who made the genre their entire career. But while soaps remained profitable throughout the decade, this boom wouldn't last forever. By the late 80s, their financial power began a steady decline, one they'd never fully recover from. But soaps didn't go down without a fight. Traditionally grounded in realist drama, daytime soaps of the 80s and 90s took a bold, fantastical turn. The styles and sensibilities of comedy and music videos started to appear, while action-adventure plots, sci-fi elements, and even fairy tale-like narratives became the norm. It made for some seriously gripping TV. For example, in a major One Life to Live storyline that spanned several months starting in February of 1988, Clint Buchanan traveled through time, landing in the Old West circa 1888, and then he encountered Viki's great-grandmother, Ginny Fletcher. The story began when Clint was suffering from blindness after being shot, and he returned home to his ranch in Arizona. He then enters a difficult 100-mile horse race through the Arizona desert, but unbeknownst to him, his vengeful ranch hand George, who was really the brother of his ex-lover Maria, had put a drug into his horse's feed that would make the horse violent so he would throw Clint and kill him. Clint was indeed thrown from his horse, but when he hit the ground, he hit his head on a rock and it knocked him out. He regained consciousness, but quickly realized he was no longer blind, and then he walked into a dusty old-timey town, Buchanan City, that looked just like it was in the Old West. There were people in the town who looked strangely familiar, and Clint quickly realized that he somehow had stepped back in time to the year 1888 and was standing looking at his own Wild West ancestors. Many parallels were drawn between the characters of the 20th century and their 19th century counterparts, and the story reached a unique height of poignancy and appeal when Clint encountered the gentle, wise, and loving Miss Ginny, a schoolmarm with a thwarted thirst for love, life, and experience, who just happened to be the great-grandmother of his modern-day wife, Viki. Both characters were played, of course, by Erica Slezak. Eventually, Clint finds out from an old Native American named Clear Eyes that he was called back in time to bring peace to a long-standing feud between Farmer McGillis's clan and Buck Buchanan's family. Clint ends up mending those fences, but he loses hope that he's going to make it back to his own time. So he ends up asking Miss Ginny to marry him. Viki, in the meantime, is terribly worried about Clint because no one's heard from him or seen him for like days. Just when it looks like all is lost and they're never going to find him, Blaze Buchanan, an old-timey character from the 19th century, is hurled forward into time, and she seeks out Viki to tell her that Clint had survived a time warp to the past, but that he needed her help. So they're both able to find the wrinkle in time again that allows them to go back to 1888 and Buchanan City, and then Viki walks into the saloon just as Clint and Ginny are about to exchange their wedding vows. Clint turned and locked eyes with Viki and quickly leaves his bride-to-be with his true wife. Miss Ginny faints at the sight of her twin great-great-granddaughter, and that happy reunion was clouded because Ginny was very hurt at the loss of her almost husband. Clint feels bad and tries to talk to Ginny and explain. Viki has a hard time believing it's all going on, and she starts talking to Ginny, and they become friendly. Viki helps Clint realize that if they don't get Ginny and her former beau, Randolph Lord, back together, then Viki will never be born. So the two set out on a successful mission of reuniting them. After they set Randolph and Ginny back on the road to romance, and Buck Buchanan wants to kill Clint for his part in hurting Ginny, Clint and Viki decide to set out into the desert to find the time warp. They find a cave guarded by Clear Eyes, and with his help and guidance, they are able to once again step through the hole in time back to their own year of 1988. After Viki and Clint's unconscious bodies are found in the desert, they're taken to the nearest hospital. Clint's restored eyesight continues, much to his relief, and they're both happy to be home again. Viki and Clint don't know how to explain to their family and friends what exactly happened to them. Viki herself is not sure what to make of their Old West adventure and wonders if it might have been all just a fantastic dream. On All My Children, Natalie Marlowe, ever the gold digger, was always looking for money first and love second. She was left a fortune by an elderly patient and was able to find love with Trevor Dillon, but just as things were finally looking good for Natalie, her sister Janet Green came to town. Janet, who had been jealous of her pretty smart sister her entire life, had now become obsessed with assuming Natalie's life, which included stealing her identity and her fiancé. To put it kindly, Janet had a lot of mental health issues, and while experiencing psychosis, she would hallucinate two-way conversations with her reflection in the mirror. The hallucination looked as the character did when she was first introduced, homely with dark hair and glasses. Its responses are consistently critical of Janet, and while it does provide her with solutions to current obstacles, the solutions are often illegal and something a reasonable individual wouldn't consider. As a result of her mental illness and erratic behavior, the character was sometimes referred to as Janet from another planet. Anyways, back to the story. Janet was immediately smitten with Trevor when she arrived in Pine Valley, and she was sure that they were meant to be. All she needed to do was to get rid of Natalie. So Janet lured her sister to the woods, pushed her into a well, and changed her appearance to look like her sister. Janet literally became Natalie and pursued Trevor, bedded him, married him, and became pregnant with his child. For weeks, Natalie was trapped in the dried-up, abandoned well located on the vast Wild Wind estate, secluded inside a cave. Janet would periodically visit the well to bring bread and water to her sister, but also taunt her. She eventually just decided to leave her for dead. But then Dmitri discovered her and secretly nursed Natalie back to health inside his castle-like mansion. When the truth was divulged and Janet was caught, she was sent to prison. Trevor and the real Natalie married and adopted Janet's child, Amanda. Natalie was eventually able to forgive her sister for her crimes, and she even sent Janet photos of her daughter to help pass the time in her jail cell. From January 1997 to December 1999, Aaron Spelling's Sunset Beach was the definition of soapy perfection. It had everything: shirtless hunks running in slow motion on sandy shores, a sultry saxophone theme song, and plot lines so outlandish that even diehard soap fans had to double check if they were still awake. Love triangles? Of course, but these were no ordinary love triangles. We're talking priests with secret pasts, back from the dead wives, black magic curses, and yes, a turkey baster pregnancy. Not all in the same storyline, of course, because that would be ridiculous. Among the many jaw-dropping tales, the Rosario Jewels plotline stood out as Sunset Beach's crown jewel. Pun fully intended. This saga was so bonkers, so outrageously convoluted, that it became legendary. And let's be honest, what soap doesn't need a cursed set of ancient gems to keep things fresh? The story began with Father Antonio, a man on a holy mission to return the sacred Rosario jewels to their rightful place. These weren't just any jewels, though. No, they were cursed. Naturally, a shadowy cult led by the sinister Hillary Nichols had other plans. Why just lead a normal evil cult when you can steal sacred cursed jewels for nefarious purposes? As expected, the jewels weren't just sitting in a random drawer. No, they were in the hands of an obscenely wealthy couple named Hillary and Bernie. But there was a catch. These weren't your run-of-the-mill gem collectors. They had to chant the spell Nil Sine Nomine to stay young. Because in the world of Sunset Beach, who doesn't have an ancient incantation to keep wrinkles at bay? Unfortunately, when the jewels fell into the wrong hands, things went south fast. Anyone who touched the Rosario jewels aged at lightning speed, turning Hillary and Bernie into literal mummies. In a town where back from the dead spouses and evil twins were everyday occurrences, this rapid aging was nothing short of disastrous. Enter Cole and Francesca, former jewel thieves, because of course they were, ready to save the day. With their extensive jewel-related expertise, they raced against time to return the jewels to their rightful home, a Madonna statue. Not the pop star, the other one, Jesus' mom. But here's the kicker. If the Rosario jewels weren't placed back in the statue by midnight on Christmas Eve, every single person who had come into contact with them would meet their untimely demise. That's right, death by cursed bling. Can't believe I wrote that and said that. Okay, anyways, in classic soap opera fashion, the entire story culminated in a dramatic last-minute return of the jewels just as the clock struck 12, saving the day and several major characters from a fashionably tragic fate. Because what better way to celebrate Christmas Eve than by narrowly avoiding death thanks to a pair of cursed mummy-making jewels? This is the story of Guiding Light's Brent Lawrence. And by the end of it all, 3 people will die, 3 more will almost die, and he will end up in a mental institution for dual identity disorder. Brent moved to Springfield in February 1995 to work for Spalding Enterprises, but he was really hired by Alan Spalding to do some rather unethical things. During the first few weeks of his job, Brent started to attract the attention of Lucy Cooper, who was working as the secretary of Alan's son, Alan Michael Spalding. Lucy has also developed some feeling towards Alan Michael, but Alan Michael wasn't interested. As a result, Lucy starts to go out with Brent, thinking that it would make Alan Michael jealous. But to Lucy's surprise, she found herself developing feelings for Brent. Unfortunately, the romance between Brent and Lucy would permanently end just a few weeks later, when Brent drugged Lucy's drink and essayed her. And for weeks, Lucy refused to talk to anyone because she felt ashamed. Eventually, Alan Michael finds out that Brent assaulted Lucy, and this sends him into a rage. There's eventually a whole struggle between Brent and Alan Michael that ends with Brent getting shot. And you think he dies because there's a funeral, but we should have known better. You see, Brent didn't actually die. With the help from his sister Cassie and Alan Spalding, Brent leaves town, and Alan uses Brent to usurp control of Spalding Enterprises away from his own son. A few months pass, and Lucy begins to try and get her life back on track. She was concerned that she may have contracted an STD from Brent when she was assaulted, and she starts attending a support group for people who were infected with HIV. Lucy also begins to get close to a new employee of Spaulding Enterprises, a middle-aged woman named Marion Crane. Lucy and Marion bonded over their experiences, and Marion told Lucy a story about how she herself was assaulted and how traumatic the experience was for her. Lucy soon began to confide everything to Marion, but of course, I think you all know what's coming. Marion is actually Brent, dressed as a woman. Apparently, he found inspiration from the film Mrs. Doubtfire and secretly dressed himself up as a woman in order to get close to Lucy so he could plan his revenge. But as Brent began to play Marion more and more, he became extremely unhinged, out of touch with reality, and just plain dangerous to be around. He hacked into the hospital records for Cedars Hospital and changed Lucy's HIV test to a positive result. Yeah, well, later Lucy had a second test done and confirmed she didn't have the virus, but still. And when Brent tried to rig that test, he was caught in the act by Reva Shane. Fortunately for Brent, Reva was living in an Amish paradise when he assaulted Lucy, so he let her go. And yes, I realize what I just said. I talked about the Amish Reva story in my first soap video. Anyway, dressed as Marion, Brent goes full psycho Norman Bates and kills 3 people. Still oblivious to the fact that Marion was Brent, Lucy invites her to spend Thanksgiving with her and Alan Michael, and Marion accepts, thinking that this will be the opportunity to get rid of both Lucy and Alan Michael for good. But in the midst of sabotaging Alan Michael's car, they accidentally run over Brent. Oh my god. It just keeps going. Okay. In the hospital, Marion tells Dr. Rick Bauer that she's undergoing gender reassignment surgery, and as a doctor, he has to abide by the patient-doctor confidentiality agreement, and he can't tell anyone. Rick agrees, and the charade continues. Brent ends up kidnapping Lucy at the New Year's Eve party at the country club, and then holds her captive in the old lighthouse. It's there that Brent reveals to Lucy that he's alive and confesses all of his crimes. Lucy also discovers the reason why Brent suddenly went insane. When he was a kid, his mother would verbally and physically abuse him, and as a result of this, he found himself becoming unusually violent towards women as a side effect. Of course, Alan Michael tries to rescue Lucy from Brent, but Brent shoots him in the arm and keeps both of them hostage. Once Alan and Buzz realize this, they know they have to work fast before Brent can do anything to harm them. Alan works out a deal with Brent. He would give him $10 million plus a jet to anywhere in the world he wanted, but he has to let Alan Michael and Lucy go in exchange. And thanks to Reva, she manages to follow Brent to the lighthouse and alerts everybody of their whereabouts. Brent is finally apprehended in the end, and Alan Michael and Lucy are saved, with Brent's storyline coming to an end as he is taken to a mental facility. In February of 2006, the city of Port Charles on General Hospital was hit by a pandemic of the encephalitis virus, accidentally brought in by Luke Spencer, who became a carrier following a trip to the Markham Islands. Fans dubbed this event the monkey virus. Here's how it went down. While visiting the Markham Islands, Luke Spencer, under the guise of Dr. Von Schummerman, checks into a hotel and receives a warning from the manager about the island's hostile natives. Shortly after, Luke is hit by a tranquilizing dart in his room and wakes up as a captive of a remote tribe. Mistaken for an actual American doctor, Luke is summoned to treat the chief's ill son. How does he do that? Oh, he administers a Tic Tac, which miraculously reduces the boy's fever. In gratitude, the Islanders present Luke with a flask of alcohol, which he downs immediately without thinking twice about it. Awakening later, he discovers the village has been deserted and is ablaze. Only a chimp, who had been with the boy, responds to his calls for help. Luke is able to escape with the chimp, and then in the midst of their departure, the presumed dead Robert Scorpio emerges, marking his return after more than a decade with the foreboding phrase, "And so it begins." Luke gets back to Port Charles with the rescued chimp and a highly contagious encephalitis virus, and when he and his daughter Lulu fall ill, he recognizes the contagion and becomes concerned for anyone who has been at the Quartermain Mansion or in contact with its visitors. Robert Scorpio, working with the WSB, is horrified as Port Charles citizens begin exhibiting symptoms. While breaking into the hospital records to track the infection, Robert is discovered by Robin Scorpio, who is shocked and furious to find her father alive. As several citizens begin to be hospitalized, the chimp is exonerated as the virus source. Luke, showing unique improvement, is identified as both the carrier and the key to a cure. He agrees to risk his health to help create an antidote for Lulu. With the hospital quarantine, Jason Morgan and Carly Spencer flee to locate the chimp, now believed to be vital for the antidote. However, as they close in, they're ambushed by gunmen in an SUV who kidnap the chimp and shoot at them as they escape. They contact Justice Ward with the SUV's license plate details, and he informs them that it's registered to Crylium Industries, a pharmaceutical company on the Markham Islands. After tailing the SUV to the Metro Court Hotel and interrogating one of the men, Jason and Carly venture to the Markham Islands themselves, hoping to secure an antidote. As the virus ravages Port Charles, the death toll climbs quickly, and then in a surprising turn of events, the Quartermain mansion, maid Alice is rendered unconscious by a tranquilizer dart after receiving an unexpected package. The contents of the package, a vial of antidotes, and they're dispatched to a mysterious woman staying at Metro Court. This woman forwards a sample of the antidote to General Hospital, attaching a substantial price tag to it. She insists on a rendezvous at the Floating Rib via a call to General Hospital. However, Robert and Luke note that the Floating Rib has been closed for decades, suggesting the woman must have ties to Port Charles history. It is later disclosed that the enigmatic woman is Holly Sutton, the widow of a Crylium Industries shareholder and former paramour of both men, the corporation that released the virus and profiting from the cure. Upon returning to Port Charles, Jason and Carly manage to trace the antidote to the airport, and there they confront two of Holly's armed associates who are loading the antidote onto a plane. Carly feigns having the virus and collapses, which allows her to incapacitate one of the men while Jason subdues the other. They retrieve the antidote and head to the hospital, but the police on guard refuse them entry. Fortunately, after calling ahead, Patrick Drake emerges and grants them access. Alan Quartermain warns Patrick about the lack of time for drug testing, but Patrick proceeds to administer the antidote regardless. Soon after, all patients receive the antidote and start to show signs of recovery. Holly is apprehended by Robert for her offenses. As Sonny and Emily leave the hospital for Sonny's limousine, the quarantine and emergency personnel gradually disperse. The limousine drives off as the screen displays the caption, "And so it ends." It will literally be impossible for me to explain the Baby Swap storyline from 2004, but I had to mention this whopper because it saw a major crossover of 20 characters between All My Children and One Life to Live. There are so many characters involved. Here's the best I can do in a nutshell. The story began when Paul Kramer from One Life to Live left Landview to visit his estranged secret wife, Babe Carey, in Pine Valley on All My Children. This was around the same time that his sister Kelly Kramer had a miscarriage, and she was desperate for a child so she could save her marriage. One night during a rainstorm and subsequent flood, Paul found himself delivering the babies of both Babe and her friend Bianca Montgomery. He then staged a crash with his medical evacuation helicopter and took baby AJ Chandler to give to Kelly. Then he gives baby Miranda Montgomery to Babe and tells Bianca that her baby had died in the accident. Not knowing the baby's origins, Kelly brings Babe's infant back to Landview, passing him off as her own child with her husband Kevin Buchanan. Months later, Babe discovers that her daughter really belongs to the grieving Bianca, but she doesn't say a word and allows Paul to manipulate her. Meanwhile, a devastated Kelly discovers that Paul has stolen her son from his mother, and desperate for cash, he blackmails Kelly by threatening to reveal the secret to Kevin. Bianca's daughter was finally returned to her a year later for Christmas 2004, and once Kevin learned the truth, he and Kelly returned Babe's son as well. It's time for another Viki Lord story. Back in 1987, One Life's to Live Grand Dame of Landview, a character played for decades by Erica Slezak, was reunited with everyone she knew when she died during brain surgery. The storyline began when Viki and Clint's marriage was crumbling, and she was dealt a blow when she witnessed a fight between Clint and Tom Dennison, the identical twin of her late husband, Joe Riley. When she awoke, Viki discovered that she had no memory of the previous 8 years. She had wiped out her entire history with Clint, and she thought that Tom was her late husband, Joe. Even though Viki and Clint were heading for a divorce before the memory loss, the judge refused to grant the divorce as long as Viki had no memory of her relationship with Clint. So at the urging of Tom, she had some tests run. Those tests revealed that Viki had a brain aneurysm, which required immediate surgery. And during that surgery, Viki died and went on a journey aboard a starship to heaven with the guide of her guardian angel, Virgil. In a magnificent all-white set that had to be built in a separate studio at enormous expense, Viki came face to face with a host of deceased loved ones, family members, friends, and even enemies. Her late father, Victor Lord, was among those present, and a lot of loose storylines could have been tied up had she thought to ask him directly who caused his death, but that's a video for another day. Anyways, she also met up with Joe Riley, and he urged her to return to Earth and reunite with Clint. After facing her demons, Viki recovered and returned to reunite with her estranged husband, just as Joe had told her to do. This elaborate gambit ran for several weeks, and viewers absolutely loved it. The storyline ended up being so successful that it rebuilt One Life to Live's audience. The show had slipped to 6th or 7th in the ratings, and Viki's heavenly starship beamed it back up to the top 3. The outrageous storyline was such a hit that it happened 2 more times before the show came to an end in 2012. Before I move on to the next storyline, there are a few more insane details that I need to mention about Viki. Here's the thing, Viki Lord was introduced as a character on One Life to Live back in July of 1968. And by November of that year, viewers had met the character's first alternate personality, Nikki Smith. At the time, Viki was a 20-something college grad and an heiress, while Nikki was a sexually promiscuous party girl. Nikki appeared numerous times over the next 4 decades, more than all her other alters combined, and Viki was quite skilled as masquerading as Nikki. No, Nikki was skilled at masquerading as Viki. Oh my god, I'm gonna get myself confused. Anyways, she even had 2 serious relationships as Nikki, one with Vince Wallach and one with Harry O'Neill, and neither one realized that Nikki was an alter of Viki. You following me here? Okay, then in the mid-90s, Viki had 5 more alters appear and integrate with her baseline psyche when her abusive childhood was revealed. One alter was named Tommy, a 14-year-old male who embodied Viki's anger and rage at her abuse. There was Jean Randolph, the calm and collected caretaker of the others, who got her name from Viki's mother, Eugenia Randolph Lord. There was Princess. It was Viki as a 7-year-old girl, a traumatized kid who is constantly reliving the abuse she suffered at the hands of her father. There's also Tori Lord, a 19-year-old alter who supposedly murdered Victor Lord in 1976. It was later revealed that Victor had survived. And finally, there was Victor Lord himself, a personality that was a reflection of Viki's abusive father. This one only emerged a handful of times and was honestly quite confusing considering all of the decades of story before it. But anyways, one time Victor appeared was when he took over Viki to attempt offing himself by cutting her wrists to expel Victor from her body. And I'm just gonna leave that right there. It's YouTube and I don't want to get in trouble. So anyways, I had to mention Viki's alters. It was impossible really to get into some specific storylines about it, but this was such a big part of Viki's character over her 4 decades on One Life to Live that I had to mention Nikki and the others. So there you go. Grab some snacks because I'm going to attempt to tell the story of the Prometheus Disk from General Hospital, and this is going to take a minute. As I said earlier in this video, General Hospital pioneered action and adventure in daytime dramas, along with the added elements of intrigue and espionage, science fiction, and organized crime stories, something unprecedented in daytime TV. As the already complex storylines ventured into more action-oriented territory, it's no surprise that at the height of the Cold War, General Hospital would introduce such intelligence agencies like the WSB, the World Security Bureau, and its counter-organization, the nefarious DVX. The show has had many WSB agents, including Robert Scorpio and Anna Devane, who were embroiled in numerous adventures. One of these undertakings happened in 1983, and it involved a wealthy American man, his DVX lookalike, and something called the Prometheus Disk. In 83, Celia, a distant cousin of Lila Quartermain's, arrived in Port Charles, and Edward Quartermain's illegitimate son, Jimmy Lee Holt, was immediately enamored. But Celia spoke of her engagement to a Dr. Grant Putnam. Still, she couldn't deny their attraction. As Grant and Celia's wedding day drew closer, he told her to break away from Jimmy Lee or the wedding was off. She assured him that the affair was over. Meanwhile, Luke Spencer, on the heels of the Ice Princess story, was presumed killed in an avalanche. But it turned out that he had only been temporarily paralyzed, and he returned home after physical therapist Natalie Dearborn helped him recover. Then Natalie arrived in Port Charles, revealing that she and Grant Putnam were actually DVX agents. The DVX worked towards stealing the secrets of a powerful energy source called the Prometheus Disk. Higher up, Gregory Malco orchestrated a plan to get them from Dr. Gerald, who had developed the formula. Then it was further revealed that Natalie's real name was Natasha. Dr. Gerald was doing his research on the energy source at Port Charles University, and the Prometheus Disk was actually what was used to store the project's top secret information. On Celia's wedding day, Jimmy Lee lured her to a cabin in the country to make one last-ditch effort to get her to love him. When she refused, he hid her clothes, and she had to escape with nothing but a towel, eventually flagging down a chicken truck and arriving at the wedding. Yes, this is real. Okay, Grant was furious, assuming that she had an affair with Jimmy Lee, and knocked out the young Quartermain. As he was about to call the wedding, Natalie ordered Grant to continue with his cover and go through with it, and so Grant and Celia were wed. During Celia's and Grant's marriage, Natalie and Gregory grew uneasy as Celia started to question Grant's secretiveness. They ordered Grant to kill Dr. Gerald or Celia would die. In the tradition of shocking General Hospital plot twists, Grant then realized that he loved Celia more than the DVX and couldn't follow through with the orders. So Gregory entered the lab and shot Dr. Gerald. Threatened with death, Grant did as he was ordered and attempted to steal the disc, but Luke grabbed it. In the pandemonium, Luke, Celia, and Holly Sutton were ultimately captured. Gregory kills Natalie and then threatens to kill the hostages as well unless a microfilm containing the equation on the Prometheus Disk was given to him. Yes, this is a daytime soap in the 80s. I swear. It's like a James Bond movie. Okay, it turned out that the WSB was about to launch a top secret satellite at the same time and therefore also needed the disk to power it. In exchange for Celia, Robert Scorpio gave Gregory the microfilm that had been given to him by WSB director Ted Ballantine. Gregory was not happy that the microfilm turned out to be phony, while Robert planned to storm the pavilion where Luke and Holly were being held. Meanwhile, Grant, secretly working for the good guys, had switched the guards' bullets with blanks, knocking out Gregory and taking off. Robert arrived seeing the WSB satellite was launched and realized that Grant had saved the day. Meanwhile, in England, a man with amnesia noticed an article in an American newspaper telling the story of a spy using Grant Putnam's identity. After reading the article, the man suddenly regains his memories and speech, realizing that he was the real Grant Putnam, and that the DVX stole his identity. He had come to London in 1975 to attend medical school, and as the doctors tried to tell him what had happened in the years he had lost his memory, the real Grant became enraged to find out the imposter had married Celia. He managed to convince the hospital to release him, despite the fact that a doctor named Campbell warned that Putnam was psychotic. Andre Chemin, the fake Grant, trained his whole life to mimic rich American Grant Putnam, and when the time was right, Putnam would be replaced with Andre flawlessly. Not even Celia knew the difference. The fake Grant then met with Ted Ballantine and Robert Scorpio, proclaiming that he didn't know anything about the real Grant Putnam and was dedicated to America and helping the WSB root out DVX spy nests. So confused. Filled with vengeance against the man who stole his life, identity, and face, Grant Putnam returns to Port Charles, promising Celia that he wouldn't interfere in her life. The imposter Grant and Celia were still deeply in love and changed their last name to Andrews. Grant Andrews' medical license was revoked, relegating him to taking a construction job with Jimmy Lee. Grant Putnam secretly plotted to destroy Andrews and Celia's marriage by planting evidence to make the couple think that each other were having an affair. And Dr. Campbell came to America to warn about this dangerous man, but Putnam strangled the doctor, dumping his body into the river. Okay, that's enough. I can't anymore. There's too much. Good thing there's not a test on this. Lord have mercy. Okay, I had to do it. I had to talk about passions. But I will say in advance that I am currently writing a whole big script solely about passions because it was so bananas that it deserves its own video. So be on the lookout for that. But today we're going to talk about Vincent Clarkson, also known by the alter ego Valerie Davis, who is the only child of Eve Russell and Julian Crane. Vincent was abducted and placed in foster care after he was born, and his parents were told that he had died. This led to Vincent developing severe abandonment issues as he grew up because he grew to believe that his parents had no love for him and abandoned him. Due to his parents' drinking and drug use, Vincent was born with a condition known as hermaphroditism, or he was born with both male and female reproductive organs. And in Vincent's case, both sets of reproductive organs were fully functional. I'm going to pause right here and point out that Vincent was played by an actor named Philip Jean-Marie, while Valerie was played by actress Daphne Duplay. For months, both actors played their respective characters without knowing that Vincent and Valerie were actually the same character. They didn't find out the truth until receiving the script and shooting the scene that had the reveal. Anyways, Vincent's biological grandfather, Alistair Crane, preyed on his grandson's condition and was able to use his disturbed grandson to carry out a reign of terror over the citizens of Harmony. Under Alistair's influence, Vincent repeatedly essayed his sister Fancy, murdered 3 people, set fires to cover up the crimes, and framed Fancy's fiancée Louise for the murders. Vincent also terrorized Ethan and Teresa, going so far as to attempt to murder them on multiple occasions, and he carried on an affair with his half-sister Whitney's husband, Chad, who was also his uncle. Yeah, figure all that out. Passions. Young and the Restless usually avoided the insane adventure and sci-fi storylines and instead kept things focused on relationships and workplace drama. But for 5 years in the late 80s and early 90s, things got pretty crazy with villain David Kimball. Kimball arrived in Genoa City in 1986 as Jill Abbott's sexy new assistant. He was put in charge of the Jabot Cosmetics men's line and immediately started to romance his boss in an attempt to get his hands on the Chancellor fortune. But Jill ended up firing David and began dating attorney Michael Crawford, so he then set his sights on Jill's daughter-in-law, Nina Webster, who had recently inherited a fortune from her deceased husband, Philip Chancellor III, who was Jill's son. Nina was warned about David by Chase Benson, Christine Cricket Blair, and Danny Romalotti, but she fell hard for Gimbal anyways. Nina was head over heels in love and did not believe her best friend when she relayed that Kimball had threatened her. Instead, Nina eloped with David after he signed a prenup to prove he loved her and wasn't after her for her money. Nina set her new spouse up in a company named David A. Kimball Investments, but he did not have any clients and sat at a desk in his office reading the newspaper. There was even a button on the floor under his desk that he stepped on each time Nina dropped by. The button caused the phone to ring so that it appeared he was getting business calls, and it was just to fool his wife. David eventually realized that all of Nina's inheritance was in a trust for her son, Philip Chancellor IV, so he decided to adopt the boy so he could get his hands on the money. But Catherine Chancellor and Jill talked Nina out of allowing the adoption. Then David began an affair with Diane Weston, who was a mailroom attendant. She found a clipping from a New Jersey newspaper about an heiress named Rebecca Harper, who was murdered by her husband Tom. Diane saw that Rebecca was wearing a brooch that was identical to the one that David had her wrap up for Nina. She also realized that Tom and David looked identical and put 2 and 2 together. Meanwhile, Rebecca had a friend named Vivian who came to Genoa City looking for the brooch and to prove that David murdered the heiress, but she was soon found electrocuted in her bathtub. Cricket began digging into David's background and found the photo of Rebecca wearing the brooch while with David and recognized it. By the time Cricket told Nina, she had already heard about it from Diane, and Nina also found out that David was planning to murder her and her son Philip. This was why he signed the prenup. Cricket and Danny then travel to New Jersey and find a jeweler to identify the brooch as belonging to Rebecca. Then a desperate David tries to frame Danny for possession of cocaine in an attempt to keep the duo off of his trail. When he returned to Genoa City, Nina was so heartbroken over his betrayal that she shot him 5 times. Kimball ended up surviving, but pretended he was paralyzed, and his wife was arrested for attempted murder. At the trial, Nina pleaded self-defense because she believed her husband was going to kill her and her little boy. The jury was moved by her emotional testimony and found her to be not guilty, but while she was on the witness stand, her deranged spouse was plotting his next dastardly move. He stole a body from the morgue and placed it in his hospital bed, then set it on fire. The madman then tried to get a plastic surgeon to make him look like David Hasselhoff. But instead of looking like the Hoff, the frightened doctor put David under anesthesia and carved killer into his forehead. Then David returns to Genoa City once again, this time wearing makeup, a fake mustache, and calling himself Jim Adams. He also dyed his hair gray and spoke in a southern accent. The madman began dating Nina's mother, Flo, and eventually married her and convinced Nina to make him and her mother joint heirs in the event of her death. Finally, in 1991, Danny, Nina, and Cricket attend a masquerade ball charity event, but David's there too. He dressed himself in the same wolf costume as Danny, with the intention of killing everyone. But Diane learned about the plan and replaced the bullets in his gun with wax replicas. When David eventually cornered Nina, Danny, and Cricket inside of a maze, he shot them and believed they were dead. So he went on the run, and while being pursued by the police and private detective Paul Williams, Kimball met his fitting fate. He ducked into a garbage chute in an attempt to hide and was crushed to death by the trash compactor. Days of Our Lives fans were introduced to Carly Manning when Adrian and Justin Kyriakis met her in Tahiti. The trio became fast friends, and Carly told the couple that she was on the run. So Justin and Adrian convinced Carly to hide out in Salem. Carly then came across Beau Brady, and they developed feelings for each other, even though Beau was still mourning the death of his wife, Hope. However, during a dramatic trip to Mexico, Beau and Carly held a symbolic Mayan wedding ceremony. Meanwhile, Vivian Alamain arrived in Salem in March of '92, and she was determined to take over the Alamain family business, but John inherited instead. To maintain some power, Vivian married Victor Kyriakis, but that didn't last long, and he left her for Kate Roberts. As Beau and Carly grew close, she confided in him about the baby that she lost years before. After giving birth, Vivian had told her the baby was ill and would die. However, when Beau and Carly traveled to France, where Carly gave birth, it was revealed that the baby had lived and was sold on the black market. Eventually, the truth came out that Vivian's adopted son, Nicky Alamain, was actually Carly's child. Vivian tried to flee Salem with Nicky, but Beau stopped her. Then Carly went after custody and started a bitter feud. Vivian was eventually diagnosed with a fatal heart condition and made it her dying wish to get rid of Carly so that she wouldn't be able to raise Nicky. Vivian's attempted to have her manservant Yvonne tamper with Carly's brakes failed, so she goaded Carly into an argument on a terrace so she could throw herself off and frame her, and after that, Vivian plotted to poison Carly's hospital patients to frame her for murder. After none of that worked, Vivian dosed Carly with Chinese herbs to put her into a coma and make it appear that she had died. Then they held a funeral and buried Carly alive. After Carly's funeral played out, Dazed viewers watched as her coffin was lowered into the ground and buried. When Carly eventually woke up from her coma, she found herself in the casket, complete with lights, an oxygen tank, and a radio so that Vivian could communicate with her and torture her. Just before Carly ran out of air, she was rescued by Lawrence, and Vivian's plan failed. Y'all, I've been talking about soap operas for more than 43 minutes. If you're still with me, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I promised I would tell you where these soaps are streaming now. Here is that info. Pause the screen if you need to. I've also included some links in the description to edited storylines that are free here on YouTube. There are so many more stories to share, but I'm going to have to leave you today on a cliffhanger. Part 3 will get made soon, I promise. Okay, bye.